There's a town hidden deep in the Virginia woods that never appears on maps, where no one speaks above a whisper, and the trees seem to lean in to listen. It's a place where prosperity blooms without reason, and people vanish without trace. Say the forest behind Blackwood Hollow is alive, not just with creatures, but with memory, with hunger. And for over 180 years, a single bloodline has kept it fed. This is the story of that bloodline, of the last matriarch, and of the bargain that was supposed to end with her death. But some covenants don't die. They evolve. There's a silence some places carry, not the peaceful kind, but the sort that settles on your skin like ash. Blackwood Hollow was that kind of place. I first heard the name in a half-whispered conversation in my editor's office. Strange. Confessions. Wealthy old woman. Creepy Forest Townsend Monroe, he said, sliding the file across his desk without looking up. I specialized in forgotten places and the stories they buried. Usually I chased rumors until I found exaggeration and folklore. But something about this assignment felt heavier. The road into Blackwood Hollow curled like a serpent through dense, whispering forest. Each mile deeper, the trees leaned closer to the asphalt, as if eavesdropping. The air turned thick, syrupy, and smelled of damp earth and old leaves. It was late September, and the foliage was aflame-burnt oranges and blood reds flickering like warnings. When the trees finally parted, the town appeared like a relic in a snow globe, untouched by time. Blackwood Hollow nestled in a wooded valley, its narrow streets flanked by Victorian homes, shuttered shops, and lantern-lit sidewalks. At its highest point stood Lenley Manor, its gables clawing at the sky. The house didn't just tower over the town, it watched it. I checked into the Blackwood Inn, where a brass bell over the door announced my arrival like a warning. The place smelled of lavender polish and old wallpaper. Martha Reynolds, the innkeeper, eyed me like she was measuring something. "You're not here for leaf peeping, are you?" I gave her a thin smile. "I'm writing about the town's history. Heard there's been a bit of buzz lately." Her lips tightened as she slid a key across the counter. "If you're here about Evangeline Lenley, don't go asking questions out loud. Not in this town. They listen." "They?" She didn't answer, just turned and walked into the back room, like she hadn't said a thing. My room was on the second floor, modest, with chintz curtains and a quilted bedspread. The window overlooked the town square, and beyond it, the hulking silhouette of Lenley Manor. As the sun dropped behind it, the shadows spilled over the town like ink. For a moment, I thought I saw movement in one of the manor's windows, a flicker of white against the glass. But when I blinked, it was gone. I spent that evening in the town's only tavern, the Crow's Nest. It was the kind of place where the bar stools remembered everyone who'd ever sat on them. The patrons went quiet the moment I stepped in. Small town hospitality or suspicion? I wasn't sure. The bartender was built like a tree, stump solid, bearded, and unimpressed. "What'll it be?" he asked, not looking up from polishing a glass. "Whatever's local." "And maybe a story or two about Evangeline Lenley?" The room froze. Glasses hovered mid-air. The jukebox clicked off by itself. The bartender finally met my eyes. "We don't talk about the Lenleys," he said flatly, sliding a pint toward me. "Especially not after what happened last month." Before I could respond, a voice croaked from a few stools down. "You really want to know about the Lenleys?" She asked. She was in her 60s, silver hair pulled into a tight braid, her face a roadmap of grief. Her name, I'd learn later, was Eleanor Blackwood, a name with just as much weight in this town as Lenley. "I do," I said, turning toward her. "Meet me tomorrow," she said, sliding off the stool and dropping a few crumpled bills on the counter. "Cemetery, noon." Before I could ask another question, she was out the door. The bartender watched her leave and muttered, "That's Eleanor Blackwood, last of her line, just like Evangeline." I left the bar with more questions than answers and returned to my room. Outside, the wind had picked up, and the rustling of trees sounded like whispers in a language I almost understood. I sat by the window, watching Lenley Manor. A single light flickered on in one of the towers. I didn't sleep well. By morning, the town was shrouded in fog. Mist clung to every rooftop, rolled off the hills, and made the cemetery feel like a different world. Eleanor was already there, standing before a polished gravestone. Richard Blackwood, it read. Her husband. He said the Lenleys would be the death of this town, she said without turning around. Turns out he was right. I joined her, notebook in hand. Tell me about Evangeline's confession. Eleanor's voice was tired, like it had spent years holding back truths. This town wasn't built like others. It was founded in 1843 by two families, the Lenleys and the Blackwoods. They were friends, partners, some say. More, they built the mills, the mines, the town. From nothing. But the Lenleys, they were different. She led me through rows of headstones, her boots crunching gravel. People called it charm. Others called it a curse. Every generation, one Lenley woman becomes the matriarch. She runs everything. And Evangeline, she's been matriarch for over 60 years. I frowned. Why always a woman? They say women hear the whispers better. We stopped in front of a stone mausoleum, the name Lenley carved into its iron doors. Strange. Symbols were etched around the edges. When we were girls, Eleanor said, Evangeline and I were close. But she married my brother, Thomas. They had a son. Then one night, both were dead. Carbon monoxide, they said. But rumors said she gave them up for power, for long life. My pen stopped. And the confession? 2 months ago. She called a town meeting. Everyone came. No one ignores a Lenley summon. She stood there, 93 and frail, and said she'd made a pact with something in the woods. A chill ran down my spine. A deal, Eleanor continued. Every 50 years, a Lenley must give a sacrifice, a loved one. In exchange, the town flourishes. Prosperity in exchange for blood. And Thomas, the baby? Her offering. Eleanor whispered. She said they both drank poison, willingly. Said she couldn't bear to separate them. I stared at her, stunned. Why hasn't she been arrested? She retracted the confession the next day. Sighed she was confused. But people believe her. Some do, anyway. And the records ... They line up. Every 50 years, someone close to the matriarch dies, and the town thrives. We stood in silence as the fog swirled around us. If you want answers, Eleanor said, you'll have to hear it from her. Go to Lenley Manor. Tell her Eleanor sent you. She turned and walked away, leaving me alone among the dead. The wind picked up again, whispering through the trees, and I had a feeling that Blackwood Hollow wasn't done whispering. The next morning, the clouds refused to part. A dull gray lid hung over Blackwood Hollow, pressing the fog against the earth like a secret the sky didn't want to release. Lenley Manor looked even more formidable in daylight. The road twisted. Uphill, gravel crunching beneath my tires, the forest pressing close on both sides. Through the windshield, the mansion came into view, 3 stories of Victorian stone and slate, with pointed turrets and dormer windows like watchful eyes. A house that had not only aged, but absorbed the years, heavy with memory. I parked beside a rusted fountain choked with ivy. No sign of life, save for the vines that clawed up the sides of the building. I knocked once on the massive oak door, the sound echoing like it had to travel through time. No butler, no housekeeper, just the door creaking open on its own. Standing behind it was a young woman, no older than her mid-20s. Raven black hair tied loosely at her neck and eyes, the color of glacier melt. Her expression was cautious. "You're not a local," she said, voice pleasant but controlled. "I'm a journalist. I was told Evangeline might speak with me." Her brow lifted just slightly. "Eleanor sent you?" I nodded. "That's unexpected. I'm Rebecca Harris, Evangeline's caretaker. Come in." Inside, the air was thick with the scent of cedarwood and aged velvet. The foyer spread out around a grand staircase, a chandelier suspended above like a spider's nest of crystal. Rebecca led me through a corridor of antique silence oil portraits, a grandfather clock that hadn't ticked in years. Dust like powdered bone lining every crevice. "She has good days and bad," Rebecca said. "Today seems better than most. But don't push her too hard." "I just want to understand," I said quietly. Rebecca paused at a sitting room and motioned for me to wait. "Tea?" I nodded, and she disappeared, leaving me alone with the ghosts. The room was filled with echoes of the past, china cabinets, dusty doilies, and paintings of grim women in darker times. One portrait stood out, a woman with the same sharp jaw and glacial eyes as Rebecca. The plaque beneath read, "Josephine Lenley, matriarch, 1843-1910. The original. Rebecca returned carrying a silver tray, steam rising from a porcelain teapot. "She'll see you now," she said softly. "Keep it brief." I followed her through a hallway where the wallpaper had begun to peel like skin. At the end of the corridor, a pair of French doors opened into a sunroom half-light filtering. Through gauzy curtains, plants wilting in neglected corners. There, in a high-backed chair, sat Evangeline Lenley, 93 years old, regal despite her frailty. Her silver hair was styled with meticulous care, her spine straight, and her pale hands rested like folded parchment on the chair's arms. Her gaze found mine immediately, those same piercing eyes undiluted by age. "So," she said, voice steady and deliberate, "Eleanor sent a journalist to rattle my cage. How typical of her." Rebecca placed the tea tray beside her and slipped out. Evangeline gestured to the chair across from her. "Sit. Let's hear what you've come to dig." "Up? I'm not here to cause trouble," I said. "I just want to understand what's happening in this town." She poured the tea herself, no trembling, no hesitation. "You mean my confession," she said matter-of-factly. "Or as they now call it, the ravings of a senile old woman." "And what do you call it?" Evangeline's lips curled, but the smile never reached her eyes. "I call it truth. And truth, my dear, is a dangerous thing in Blackwood Hollow." I sipped my tea. It was stronger than I expected. "You told the town you made a deal with something in the woods, that every 50 years a sacrifice must be made," she interrupted, finishing the sentence like she'd said it 1,000 times. "Yes. Your husband, your son, you said they were the offerings." "I did," she said, eyes drifting to the window. Beyond the glass, the woods swayed in a wind I couldn't hear. And I told the truth, every word of it. Then why retract? Evangeline turned back to me, her voice cool. "Because I realized the truth isn't mine alone. It belongs to something older. And breaking its silence comes with consequences." "What lives in those woods?" I asked, not sure I wanted an answer. Her eyes sharpened. "Something ancient, patient. It doesn't speak in words, but in symbols, seasons, silence. It was here before the Lenleys, before settlers, before names. And it will be here long after you and I are dust." "And it needs blood?" "All gods do," she whispered. "But ours, ... prefers it intimate, someone who loves the matriarch completely. Not just any life, a willing one." I couldn't help. And I set my teacup down harder than I meant to. That sounds insane, she laughed, a dry rasp like wind through autumn trees. Of course it does. That's why I took it back. No one wants to believe the world still has teeth in the dark. Better they think I've lost my mind. Why confess in the first place? Evangeline grew quiet, her gaze softening. For the first time, I saw something real, something human. Because I'm the last, she said. There is no daughter, no niece, no one to pass the mantle to. And when I go, the covenant ends, but hunger doesn't. She leaned forward, her voice a breath. What happens to a beast that's been fed for generations, suddenly starved? The question hung between us like a noose. Why me? I asked, why did Eleanor send me here? Because you're an outsider, she said. And outsiders still see clearly. Someone must carry the truth. When the walls fall, someone must remember why they stood. A knock at the door. Rebecca entered, gentle but firm. Mrs. Lenley needs to rest now. Evangeline didn't protest. She only turned to me and whispered, go to the library. Ask. For the records from 1843. Josephine wrote it all down. That's where the story really begins. She closed her eyes. I stood and followed Rebecca out. Before I left, I glanced back. Evangeline sat motionless, like part of the furniture, as if she'd been carved from the very bones of the house. Outside, the fog hadn't lifted Dot, and neither had the feeling that the forest was watching me. The Blackwood Hollow Public Library sat on the edge of the town square like an old sentry, watching with blind marble eyes. Its Greek Revival facade was grander than any building in town besides Lenley Manor, with columns like ancient bones holding up a crumbling pediment. The place didn't seem like a library. It felt like a reliquary. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of aging pages and something faintly metallic dust and time and forgotten truths. The librarian, a woman in her 50s with tightly pinned hair and wary eyes, greeted me as, if I were a rumor, I'm looking for the town's founding records, I said. She tilted her head slightly. Those aren't open to the public. I reached into my coat pocket. Evangeline Lenley sent me. At the sound of that name, something in her posture shifted. A blink, a breath caught in her throat. Then a slow nod. Follow me, she said. Quietly, Dot, we walked in silence past rows of fiction and folklore, until she stopped before a locked door in the back. A brass key, worn smooth by years of use, hung around her neck. She slid it into the lock. Don't remove anything. Handle with gloves. If you damage anything in there, it's not just history you're offending. It's memory. The archive was a narrow room lined with shelves, filled with leather-bound books, old journals, and boxes labeled in looping script. A small wooden table stood in the center under a dim light. The librarian pulled a thick volume from the highest shelf and laid it gently on the table. This is what you're looking for. Use these. She handed me a pair of white cotton gloves. Then she left me alone with the ghosts of 1843. The book was a journal. The ink had faded to a soft brown, and the cover bore the marks of centuries of handling. I opened it with care, the spine cracking faintly. April 15th, 1843. My name is Josephine Lenley, wife of Edmund, mother to 3, and the first of our kind to record what was done to build this place. The script was elegant and controlled, even as her words betrayed unease. She wrote of their expedition westward, of being lost in the mountains, as winter clawed at their wagons, starvation, cold, and despair, of stumbling into a valley untouched by snow, impossibly fertile, cradled by forest. They called it Providence. She called it something else. April 28th, 1843. There are symbols carved into the oldest trees, offerings left by those who came before. I asked the elders among the indigenous people Those few who still remain, what they meant, they would not answer. Only warned me to leave the forest alone. But I felt something call to me. I dreamed of it. It showed me what would happen if we stayed. I felt the temperature in the room drop. May 10th, 1843, Edmund and Richard Blackwood believe this valley is a blessing. They dismiss my concerns. They do not feel it the way I do. Last night, the thing in the forest came to me. Not in body, but in shadow. In dream, it offered me a covenant. Prosperity in exchange for acknowledgement, for sacrifice. One life freely, given. Every 50 years it chose me to be its voice, its vessel, its matriarch. I sat back, letting the words settle. I wasn't just reading history. I was trespassing on something sacred, or profane. I wasn't sure which. The next few entries described the town's astonishing rise, how the soil yielded more than it should. The timber industry exploded, and a vein of silver practically glimmered beneath the mountainside. Then came the entry that made me flinch. July 3rd, 1843, Edmund found out. He read my journal, or perhaps he simply saw the change in me. He was furious, sighed I had consorted with devils. I tried to explain. It was not evil, only old. It had offered us survival, and I accepted. He refused to listen. That night, I made the first sacrifice. The entity said, the blood must come from love. So I gave it my husband. They think it was a bear. But I know what truly prowls these woods. I closed the book and pressed my hands against my eyes, willing myself not to shake. Josephine Lenley had killed her husband to seal a deal with an ancient presence in the trees, not out of malice. Out of duty. Out of devotion to a town that hadn't yet been born. The pages that followed were meticulous. The births and deaths of townsfolk, the expansion of the mines, the creation of the schoolhouse, all documented with a cold, precise hand. But every so often, hidden between the lines of ledgers and crops, came the reminders. 1859, the entity grows hungry again. My daughter Margaret is ready. She has chosen. She mourns, but she understands. She will carry the burden now. I am weary. But the town thrives. The final entry was dated December 31st, 1859. This is my last entry. Margaret knows the rights. She will write next, should she choose to continue the record. The covenant endures. The town endures. That is all that matters. J.L. I stared at the final looping signature, then slowly closed the journal. For nearly 2 centuries, this town had been fed by something not found in textbooks, a force not benevolent, but transactional. It offered gifts for blood, silence in exchange for loyalty, and the Lenley women generation after generation had been its keepers. I removed the gloves with care, my fingers trembling. My head throbbed with questions. I didn't yet know how to ask. Was it all delusion? A family myth, passed from mother to daughter? A legacy of inherited madness? Or was Josephine's dream something real? I stepped out of the archive room like a man surfacing from underwater. The librarian was waiting near the front desk, eyeing me like she knew exactly what I'd seen. Did you find what you needed? She asked. I'm not sure, I answered honestly. She nodded, not surprised. Evangeline ever tell you what Josephine did to her own husband? I read it in her journal. She lied, you know, at the end of her life. Evangeline tried to stop the sacrifices, broke the pattern, thought she could outwit the thing in the woods. The librarian's face tightened. 3 children vanished that summer. I felt ice crawl up my spine. She learned what happens when the covenant is broken. I didn't ask how she knew. In Blackwood Hollow, everyone knows everything. They just pretend not to. I left the library with the weight of centuries in my chest. Whatever Evangeline had set in motion, it wasn't over. It was only changing. I didn't expect the knock at midnight. I was still wide awake, trying and failing to organize my notes in the room at the Blackwood Inn. The glow of my laptop screen cast long shadows against the floral wallpaper, and every creak of the old building set my nerves on edge. The knock was soft but urgent. 3 quick taps. I moved cautiously toward the door. "Who is it?" I asked. "It's Rebecca, Evangeline's caretaker." I opened the door to find her standing in the hallway, her face pale and her hair pulled back in haste. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. "Can I come in?" she asked, glancing over her shoulder as though someone might be listening. I stepped aside. "What's wrong?" Rebecca entered quickly and shut the door behind her, locking it. Her hands were trembling. "She's dying," she said flatly. "The doctor came today. Says she has maybe a day or 2 left, maybe less." I felt something shift in the room. The inevitability of time had suddenly become a crashing wave. "She's asking for you," Rebecca added. "Says there's something she needs to show you." "At this hour?" "She said it can't wait." I've worked for her long enough to know when Evangeline asks, you don't delay. I grabbed my coat and followed her outside. The night was frigid and still. The fog, thinner now, hung low across the streets like a veil. Rebecca's car was an old blue sedan that rattled as it climbed the winding road to Lenley Manor. Neither of us spoke during the drive. Her knuckles were white on the steering wheel. Inside the house, all was dark except for a dim light spilling from Evangeline's bedroom. The air smelled of dried roses and something like root rot. The hallway to her room stretched impossibly long in the silence. Evangeline lay propped up against velvet pillows in a massive 4-poster bed. Her body was small now, skeletal beneath the layers of quilt and silk. But her eyes, those ice-blue Lenley eyes, were wide open, still, sharp. "You came?" she rasped. "Good. We don't have much time." Rebecca stepped forward, but Evangeline reached out with a shaking hand and gripped her wrist. "No, stay," she commanded. "You need to hear this too." Rebecca nodded, swallowing hard, and sank into a chair beside the bed. I stood at the foot of the bed, uncertain. "I read Josephine's journal," I said. "Then you know how it began," Evangeline said. "But not how it ends." She pointed to the bedside drawer. "Top drawer. There's a book." I opened it and pulled out a small, leather-bound journal. Its cover was worn smooth. Inside, the ink was dark and steady. The dates spanned over 70 years. "This is mine," Evangeline said softly. "All matriarchs keep one, but it's the final page that matters now." I turned to the last entry. It was dated only 3 days ago. "I have made my decision. The covenant ends with me. There is no suitable heir. I will not pass this curse to another. The forest will hunger. The entity will rage. But perhaps its power will fade in time without a vessel. Rebecca suspects something. I never told her, but I see Josephine in her. It's better she doesn't know. Tomorrow, I will show them both, the journalist and Rebecca, what lies at the heart of this covenant." I looked up, heart thudding. "What do you mean, Rebecca doesn't know?" Evangeline's eyes shifted to the young woman sitting beside her. "Tell him your mother's name, dear." Rebecca blinked. "Sarah Harris," she said slowly. "Before she married my father, her name was Sarah Lenley. She never talked about her family." "She was my niece," Evangeline said. "Daughter of my brother, Jonathan. When her parents died in a car accident, I raised her." Rebecca's face had gone white. "You're saying I'm a Lenley?" "You are more than that," Evangeline whispered. "You are the last female descendant, the rightful matriarch." "No," Rebecca said quickly, rising to her feet. "That's not possible. My mother would have told me. She wasn't part of this." "She didn't know," Evangeline said. I made sure of it. I wanted at least one branch of this. Family free from the covenant. But now, I don't have that luxury. Rebecca backed away from the bed, shaking her head. I don't want this. I don't believe in any of this. You don't have to believe it, Evangeline said quietly. You only have to inherit it. I stepped forward, trying to steer the conversation. Why tell me all of this? Why? Summon me now? Evangeline's eyes locked onto mine. Because you are a witness. You're the outsider. You carry no blood, no obligation. If things go wrong, someone must tell the truth. She coughed, a rasp that seemed to shake her entire body. Then she struggled to sit up. Rebecca rushed forward to help, but Evangeline waved her off. We need to go, she said. Go where? I asked. To the woods, she said. To the place where the covenant was born. Rebecca looked horrified. You can't go out there. You're barely holding on. I will die in this bed or under the stars, Evangeline said. I choose. The stars. Help me. I looked at Rebecca. She hesitated, then nodded. We bundled her in layers and wheeled her out the back of the manor, down a path choked with roots and wet leaves. The flashlight beam bounced off trees, illuminating strange carvings in the bark symbols, like those on the mausoleum door. Eventually, the chair could go no farther. I carried her the rest of the way, following her whispered instructions through the forest until we reached a small clearing. It was a stone circle, 12 waist-high slabs arranged in a ring. Moss crept up their sides, but I could still see the carvings. Spirals, eyes, claw marks. Set me down, she said. I placed her gently in the center of the circle. Rebecca knelt beside her, shivering. What is this place? She whispered. The Heart of the Covenant, Evangeline replied. Josephine found it. The indigenous people once left offerings here. It listens. It watches. The wind rose around us, blowing inward from all directions. The forest seemed to draw a breath. Evangeline reached into her robe and produced a small vial filled with a dark liquid. What is that? I asked. The same poison I gave Thomas and our son, she said. Quick, painless. The entity prefers sacrifice, but it will accept this if offered willingly in its sacred space. Rebecca lunged, trying to take the vial. No. There has to be another way. There isn't, Evangeline said calmly. And if I don't do this, it will call. To you. In dreams, in waking, it will choose you. No. Rebecca cried. I won't be part of this. You already are, Evangeline said. It's in your blood. The wind howled louder. The trees bent inward. You must choose, Evangeline whispered. Accept the mantle and continue the covenant, or let me break it here with my death. Rebecca shook her head, tears streaming down her face. This isn't fair. I didn't ask for this. Neither did I, Evangeline said. But the forest doesn't care. The ground beneath us seemed to hum. The stone circle glowed faintly in the moonlight. Rebecca looked up, eyes wild. There's something here, watching. There always has been, Evangeline replied. Waiting, hungry. She uncorked the vial. Stop! Rebecca screamed, but Evangeline was already lifting it to her lips. Moonlight spilled into the stone circle like liquid silver. The clearing pulsed with a presence I could feel beneath my skin, in the marrow of my bones. It wasn't imagination. Something ancient was awake and watching. Evangeline held the vial to her lips. Her hand, though withered with age, did not shake. Please, Rebecca whispered, stepping into the circle. Don't do this. I must, Evangeline said, her voice as soft as wind through pine needles. There is no successor. If I die without passing the mantle, the entity will choose its own sacrifice, and it will not be merciful. There has to be another way, Rebecca said, breath hitching. Evangeline turned her gaze to her great-niece, eyes glittering in the moonlight. Then take it, the mantle. Take it willingly, and I will live. At least for tonight. Rebecca looked at me. Her expression was a storm grief, disbelief, fear. What happens if I say yes? She asked, voice cracking. You become the matriarch. Evangeline said, you inherit the power, the duty, the burden. The covenant binds itself to your blood. You'll hear its whispers, dream its dreams. You'll walk through life with a shadow stitched to your soul. And if I say no? Evangeline smiled. Then I drink, and the forest decides who to take. A silence fell, so thick I could hear the sound of Rebecca's heartbeat, and perhaps my own. Even the trees seemed to lean in, their branches quivering. Like antennae, Rebecca stood very still. Then, with shaking hands, she reached down and took Evangeline's frail fingers into her own. If I do this, she said, you promise not to drink that poison? Evangeline's expression changed, less matriarch, more grandmother. I promise, but only if you are sure. The air changed. It became electric, like the moment before lightning strikes. Rebecca drew a breath and whispered, I accept. Nothing dramatic happened. No thunder, no flash of light. Only silence, but the silence felt aware. Rebecca's body tensed. Her eyes widened, then softened. I feel it, she whispered, like something waking up inside me, something old. Evangeline nodded slowly. The bond has formed. It recognizes you now. I watched as Evangeline, suddenly looking smaller, sagged against Rebecca's shoulder. The power had left her transferred. She was no longer the gatekeeper. Let's go home, she murmured. There's nothing more to do tonight. We made our way back through the forest in a hush, the flashlight beam catching strange glyphs on the trees marks I hadn't noticed on our way in. Rebecca walked slowly, supporting Evangeline, as if the old woman had become weightless. Once inside the manor, we helped Evangeline back into bed. She didn't say much, only looked at us both with a strange satisfaction, like someone who had passed on a family secret and lived to see it understood. Rebecca sat at her bedside, clutching the old woman's hand. I turned to leave, but Evangeline stopped me with a look. Stay, she said. There's one more truth to share. I hesitated and pulled a chair closer. I lied, she said, her voice barely audible. About Thomas, about our son. Rebecca stiffened. What do you mean? Evangeline's face twisted into something that was almost shame. I didn't sacrifice them. I couldn't. I love them too much. But you said it was easier, she said, to let the town believe I had done it, that I had fulfilled the ritual. But I tried to break the covenant. I thought, if I ignored it, it would fade. I was wrong. Her gaze found mine again, filled with ghosts. That year, 3 children vanished from Blackwood Hollow. Their bodies were never found. The entity took what it wanted. Rebecca pulled her hand back slowly. You let innocent children die? Evangeline shook her head. I didn't let it happen. I failed to stop it. And I've carried that failure for 50 years. Silence again, heavy, unforgiving. And now you've passed it to me, Rebecca said. No, Evangeline said. I've passed you the chance to do what I couldn't find another way. The entity listens, but only to those it binds with. You're young, strong, clever. You might reach it. Rebecca said nothing. Her face was unreadable. Evangeline's breathing slowed, her eyes dimming. She turned to me once more. You've seen what the town won't speak. You've read the records, the journals. Someone has to tell the truth. I will, I said, though I wasn't sure anyone would believe it. Evangeline nodded once. Then she closed her eyes, and she didn't open them again. We sat in silence for a long time, Rebecca and I, surrounded by the relics of a legacy neither of us had asked for. The room felt colder, emptier. I helped her cover Evangeline's body. Then I stepped out into the hallway to give her space. Somewhere outside, the forest sighed. They buried Evangeline Lenley on a Thursday, beneath the thick gray skies of a town that had long stopped weeping for its dead. A funeral was held at Blackwood Hollow's chapel, a structure as old as the town itself, made of dark stone and stained glass that had faded to pastel bruises. The pews were filled, though the silence inside was deafening. No one cried. No one spoke above a whisper. It felt less like mourning and more like the closing of a chapter people had tried very hard not to read. I watched from the back row, notebook closed, pen forgotten in my pocket. There was nothing to record. Nothing anyone said aloud could match what I already knew. The townspeople wore black. Even the children were dressed like crows. Old men kept their hats pressed against their chests. Women dabbed their eyes without tears. Their expressions were a mix of reverence, fear, and strangely relief. Rebecca sat alone in the front pew, straight-backed, hands clasped in her lap. She wore a modest black dress, but it wasn't the clothes that marked her as different. It was her presence. She was no longer Evangeline's caretaker. She was the heir, the last Lenley woman, the new matriarch. After the service, they laid Evangeline in the family mausoleum at the top of the hill. The stone door, carved with strange forest symbols, creaked open to receive her. A hush fell over the crowd as her casket was wheeled inside. No eulogy, no prayers, only a lingering moment as the doors groaned shut and the key turned in the iron lock. And that was it. The end of Evangeline Lenley. I stayed outside the chapel while the crowd trickled away, watching Rebecca from a distance. She stood at the edge of the graveyard long after everyone else had gone. Eventually, I joined her. "She's really gone," I said. "She was already halfway there," Rebecca replied, her voice flat. The rest was just ritual. We stood in silence for a moment. Wind rustled through the trees, lifting dead leaves into lazy spirals. The forest line loomed not far behind the cemetery, a presence you could feel even without seeing. "Have you heard it?" I asked Dot. She didn't answer right away. "Yes," she said finally. "Not in words. It's more like pressure. A feeling behind the eyes. It dreams through me." "What does it want?" "Continuity, obedience, sacrifice." She glanced at me. "But I think it's listening." "You mean you think it can be reasoned with?" "I'm not sure." Rebecca turned away from the graveyard. "But I have to try." Later that evening, I visited her at Lenley Manor. She answered the door herself, her eyes tired but alert. The house felt different, less haunted, more watchful, as if something within it was waiting to see what Rebecca would become. We sat in the same sitting room where I'd first met Evangeline. The dust had been cleaned. The air was clearer. The portraits still watched us, but now their gaze felt less oppressive. "I've been reading Evangeline's journal," Rebecca said, trying to understand what she didn't say aloud. "Did she say anything about you? About passing the mantle?" "She left it vague, probably on purpose. But she mentions dreams, visions, warnings." Rebecca sipped from a chipped teacup. "And now I'm starting to have them too. What do you see?" "Not visions exactly. More like feelings. Memories that aren't mine. Walking through trees that breathe. Hearing a voice inside wind. Something old, lonely, hungry, always watching." She set the cup down carefully, as if afraid it might shatter from the tension in her hands. "I think it wants to keep the bargain, but I think it might accept other forms of sacrifice." I leaned forward. "Like what?" "Time, energy, devotion. It feeds off blood, because blood is power. But maybe there are other currencies. We've just never offered them. And you're going to try? Rebecca smiled faintly. I don't have much choice, do I? For the next few days I stayed. In town longer than I had intended. I met with locals, some of whom were more willing to talk now that Evangeline was gone. A few shared cryptic memories, strange forest lights, inexplicable booms in prosperity after tragedy, people who vanished but were never officially missed. And through it all, Rebecca remained at the manor, walking the property lines, sketching unfamiliar symbols, and spending long hours in the woods. She was changing, not in a monstrous way, but in the way that someone who has accepted an unbearable truth must adapt. Her voice grew quieter, more deliberate, her movements slower, more grounded. It was like she was tuning herself to a different frequency. One evening, just before I planned to leave, she invited me to the library room on the second floor of the manor. The shelves were filled with dusty records, town maps, even older journals, some dating back to the 1800s. This was Evangeline's archive, she explained, and now it's mine. She handed me a piece of parchment. It was a map not of the town, but of the forest behind the manor. At the center was a circle of stones, the place where she had accepted the mantle. Do you see this mark? She asked, pointing to a symbol near the edge dot. It looked like an eye, bisected by a jagged line. It's repeated here and here, she said, pointing to other places on the map. I think these are thresholds, places where the forest's energy is strongest, places it ... leaks through. What are you going to do? Visit them, leave offerings, not of blood, of will, pieces of myself. I raised an eyebrow. That sounds dangerous. Rebecca smiled, but there was no warmth in it. So is the alternative. She walked me to the front door as I prepared to leave. The air outside had turned sharp and cool, the smell of rain on stone rising from the earth. Will you publish any of this? She asked. Not all of it, I admitted. Some truths aren't meant for wide eyes. She nodded. But the town deserves some version of the story. They'll get one. She reached into her pocket and handed me a card, a name, a number, in case you ever need to speak to someone who knows what watches from the woods. We shook hands. Her grip was firm, not like the girl who had opened the door to me just days ago. That girl was gone. I left Blackwood Hollow early the next morning, just as dawn kissed the treetops. In my rearview mirror, Lenley Manor stood solemn and unmoving, its windows catching the light like eyes. Beyond it, the forest stretched endlessly. Patient, listening, Rebecca would return to it soon, and I had the uneasy feeling that it had already begun speaking back. Rebecca returned to the woods the night after I left. Alone, she didn't tell anyone, not the townsfolk, not the priest who'd muttered prayers at Evangeline's funeral, and certainly not the mayor, who treated the Lenleys like old statues. Best left undisturbed, but the forest knew. It had been expecting her. Later, she would describe the journey in her own words. A pilgrimage, she called it, though no church would have sanctioned it. She followed the path behind Lenley Manor, deeper than she'd ever gone before, deeper than Evangeline had likely gone in years. She carried no flashlight this time. The moonlight, she said, was enough, and the forest provided what she needed: glow beetles flickering among leaves, the soft sheen of fungus lighting her way like a path of stars underfoot. At her side, she carried a small satchel inside, only objects she considered sacred: her mother's wedding ring, a handwritten letter from a childhood friend who died young, and a lock of Evangeline's silver hair. No blood, no bones, only memory. She returned to the circle of stones, the place where she had accepted the mantle. The air was colder there, denser, not with wind, but with presence. She stepped into the circle and knelt, and she spoke aloud, Not in ritual, but in honesty. I'm here, she said. I carry the weight now, but I don't accept the terms as they are. Silence answered her at first, then a soft stirring like wind, but not wind, like breath. I offer myself, she said, but not in death. In life, I give you my time, my thoughts, my devotion. I will return, again and again. I will learn your language, your shape. But you will not take from me what I will not give. The stones vibrated, not visibly, but inwardly like tuning forks struck by invisible fingers. The clearing darkened around her, though no clouds had passed. A tension coiled in the air, like something weighing her off her dot, then it eased, and the wind returned. Rebecca rose, unsure if what she had done had been heard or merely tolerated. But that night, as she lay in bed, the forest came to her in a dream, not as a creature, not as a voice, but as a feeling roots curling around her ankles, vines brushing her throat, eyes blinking open beneath moss. She awoke with soil beneath her fingernails. Weeks passed. Slowly, the town began to feel different. Small things at first. The crows stopped gathering on the chapel roof. The trees at the edge of town, which had always leaned slightly toward Lenley Manor, seemed to straighten. A patch of wildflowers bloomed in the center of the square. In October, no one talked about it aloud, but they noticed, and they watched Rebecca. She didn't hide anymore. She walked the streets with quiet purpose, visiting the grocer, the librarian, the mechanic. She donated money anonymously to fix the rotting bridge over Black Hollow Creek. She helped the local apothecary replant herbs destroyed by frost. The town's heartbeat, once faint and erratic, seemed to steady, but not everyone was comforted. One afternoon, a man approached her outside the town hall. Mid-60s, clean-shaven, dressed like someone who still called Evangeline Miss Lenley out of habit. His name was Arthur Pelham, former town alderman. "We know who you are," he said, voice low and steady. "I'm not hiding it," Rebecca replied. "You're young. You think you can change the rules. But the covenant doesn't bend. It only waits." Rebecca met his gaze without blinking. "It's already changing." He leaned closer. "Then be careful. It may change you more than you change it." That night, Rebecca returned to the forest. This time, she went beyond the stone circle farther than Evangeline had ever dared. She followed the eye-shaped glyphs etched into bark, walking until even the air felt older. There, in a clearing shaped like a spiral, she felt it most strongly. A gravity, a center of something. She sat in the dirt and placed her offerings on the ground. And this time, she sang no words, no melody, just sound, something instinctive, ancestral, the sort of song that lives in marrow and comes from dreams. The forest listened, and then it answered, not with words, but with movement. A tree to her left shuddered not in the wind, but as if exhaling. Its bark split slightly, and sap ran down its side in rivulets of dark amber. Rebecca rose slowly, stepped closer. Inside the crack in the tree, she saw carvings not human-made, but grown like veins shaped into runes. A message, a memory in her mind. Images bloomed. Josephine, barefoot, kneeling in this same place. Her hands stained red, her face pale, whispering apologies to something unseen. And beside her a child, limp in her arms. Rebecca gasped, stumbling back. The tree sealed itself without sound. The message was clear. The forest remembered everything. I returned to Blackwood Hollow a month later, drawn back by equal parts curiosity and dread. The town was thriving. The hardware store had reopened. The mine had struck a new vein silver again. The school was expanding. Even the old church had received new stained glass, courtesy of a Lenley family grant. Rebecca met me at the manor. She was different, not in appearance, but in presence, like a candle that had learned to burn without a flame. "I've been negotiating," she said simply as we walked through the halls. "And it listens," she said. "It accepts offerings of energy, ritual, emotion, sometimes even time. I sit with it for hours. I let it dream through me. I've traded away sleep, tears, even joy." That sounds like a steep price. It's better than blood. We stopped by a window overlooking the forest. The trees moved like waves, bending toward the manor. "Have you asked for anything in return?" "Only one thing," she said. "What's that?" "To stop hungering for innocence." She looked at me, her eyes clear but impossibly ancient. "I don't know if it will last. I don't know if it will hold, but it's listening." And for now, that was enough. But deep in the forest, the roots were still shifting, not angry, but watchful, because while Rebecca had inherited the covenant, she had also rewritten its first line. Autumn deepened into November, and Blackwood Hollow wore its change like a second skin. The trees held on to their leaves longer than they should have. The ground stayed warmer. Snow, which usually dusted the valley by late October, didn't come. The townspeople noticed, of course, they did, but no one asked questions. Not out loud. Rebecca had brokered a fragile peace. The forest fed on her devotion, on the offerings she made of time, grief, and solitude, and for a while that seemed to be enough. Businesses thrived. The mine produced again. The town even held a harvest festival for the first time in over a decade. But peace with gods, especially old ones, is never final. It's negotiated moment by moment, offering by offering. And soon the forest began to test her. It started subtly. Rebecca would wake with her hair wet, as if she'd bathed in dew, dirt under her fingernails she didn't remember gathering. Her dreams became more vivid, and longer, so long that she began to wake tired, as if her body had traveled without her consent. She told me about it in a letter, written in her careful hand. I think it's inside me now, not as a possession, but as a shadow. It doesn't speak. It nudges, reminds, demands silence when I try to resist. I haven't bled for it, but sometimes I wonder if I've bled into it, and what that makes me. When I returned to the town that month to check on her, Rebecca met me at the front gate of Lenley Manor. She looked fine at first glance, composed, collected, but up close there were subtle changes. Her eyes were darker, around the edges, as if sleep had become optional. She blinked less. Her movements were slower, like she was always half listening to something just beyond human hearing. She didn't greet me with words. Instead, she led me through the garden, toward the back trail, the one that threaded into the forest. We walked in silence until we reached the place where the trees began to press inward. Then she stopped. "It's changing again," she said softly. I waited. "It wants more." "What do you mean?" I asked. She didn't look at me. "I think it's adapting. It's curious. I bargained with something ancient, but that doesn't mean it's stagnant. It single quotes learning me, learning what I value. And now it's asking for that instead." Examples? Last week, the mayor collapsed with a stroke. He's fine now, but he doesn't remember the last 10 years. Everything he ever argued against me gone, erased. That was no coincidence. I felt a chill. "And yesterday," she continued, 2 children wandered into the forest. They were found unharmed, but they were talking to something, or someone. They said it spoke through trees. In my voice. That's impossible." She turned to me then, her gaze heavy. "Is it?" I couldn't answer. Rebecca led me deeper into the woods, past the standing stones, and into a glen I hadn't seen before. The trees here bent inward unnaturally, like they were sheltering something. Or, owing to it, in the center was a stone altar. It hadn't been there weeks ago. Rebecca stepped toward it, running her fingers along its surface. This is new. I didn't build it, but it knew I would come. We stood there for a long time, the wind hushed, the air thick with meaning. Is this your offering space? I asked finally. I think it's its suggestion, she replied. A place where it wants me to give something, but I don't know what yet. She placed a bundle of rosemary on the altar, then a polished stone. A page torn from Evangeline's journal. The trees rustled. That's all you're giving it? I asked. For now, she said. That night, I stayed in one of the guest rooms at the manor. Around 3 a.m., I woke to a faint knocking sound, not at the door, but on the window. I stepped closer and froze. A child stood outside, a girl, maybe, 8 or 9, barefoot in the frost. Her eyes were glazed, her dress muddy. She stared at me without blinking. I ran to the door and rushed outside, but she was gone. Only small footprints led into the trees and then vanished. The next morning, I told Rebecca. I've seen her, she said quietly. She's been visiting the edge of the woods. I think the forest is trying to show me something. Or warn me. About what? That it knows what loss feels like. And now it's trying to recreate it. In my image. She didn't elaborate, but over the next week, more reports came in quietly. Without panic, a teenage boy vanished for 6 hours and returned with no memory of where he'd been, but whispered a single word in his sleep. Roots, a woman. Claimed she'd found a small bundle on her doorstep moss, bones, and a lock of silver hair tied with red string. When she burned it, her dead dog appeared at her front gate, wagging its tail before vanishing again. All strange. All deeply personal. As if the forest was reaching into people's private griefs, molding them into messages. Rebecca realized what was happening. The entity wasn't demanding blood, but it was demanding presence, emotion, attention. And that was perhaps more dangerous, because while blood has limits, grief does not. In the final days of my visit, I followed Rebecca to the altar again. This time, she brought nothing. She simply stood before it and spoke. I won't give you what you're asking for, she said to the clearing. Not memory, not sorrow, not guilt. You have all of that already. The trees stirred. But I will give you guidance, she continued. You chose me. Then you'll learn from me. And I say this ends with me. No more unspoken bargains. No more quiet disappearances. If you want to feed, you feed with consent. The wind fell still. Then, a sound, not a growl, not a whisper. A kind of low vibration through the leaves. Like laughter from something that had never learned how to laugh. Rebecca didn't flinch. She only stepped back, turned, and walked away. And the forest let her go, for now. It started with the trees, not all at once. Just a few, scattered across the town's edge. Maples and birches that bled black sap from their trunks, as if weeping from old wounds. Then came the crows, hundreds, thousands, circling the town square, like vultures without a kill, perching silently on rooftops and power lines, watching and then the fog returned, thicker than before, heavier. It clung to windows and slipped beneath doorways. Streetlights flickered, then died. People whispered about their pets disappearing, about shadows moving behind curtains when no one was home. Blackwood Hollow had always known how to keep secrets. Now it felt like the town itself was becoming one. Rebecca knew instantly what was happening. It's retaliating, she said when I called her after the crows arrived, testing my limits, reminding me that I'm not in control, that I'm merely tolerated. You told it no, I said. Now it's seeing how far you'll bend. She didn't answer right away. Then, it's starving, but not for blood, for reverence. The first person to go missing was Daniel Carroll, the town's postmaster. A quiet man in his 60s who'd never left the hollow in his life. One morning, he simply didn't show up. His mailbag was found neatly hung on the hook inside the post office. The front door was unlocked. His coat was still on the rack. But Daniel was gone. The sheriff organized a search party. Nothing. No tracks. No signs of struggle. No hint he'd ever left the building. 2 days later, a child disappeared. 5-year-old Lily Graham, last seen playing in her backyard near the tree line. Her toy rabbit was found propped against the trunk of an elm. Its head turned backward. Panic spread quickly. The townspeople gathered at the church, whispering prayers that no longer felt like they belonged to the God inside. Rebecca stood on the steps of Lenley Manor that evening and addressed the crowd. "I know you're scared," she said, voice clear over the wind. "You have every right to be. But this town's pain is older than any of us. And now it's demanding to be felt. Is this your doing?" Someone shouted. "No," she said, "but it's my responsibility." That night, she walked alone into the forest. She didn't tell me what happened when she came back. Not at first. Only that she had offered the forest something it had never been given. The truth, not wrapped in ritual, not buried in secrecy. Just spoken aloud. "I told it everything," she said. "About me. About Evangeline. About the town. About how we've all pretended this place wasn't built on sacrifice. I told it I wouldn't continue that lie. And I asked. It didn't answer." The fog thickened. Electricity failed throughout the valley. The mine collapsed in on itself. No casualties, but workers swore they heard whispering beneath the earth before the cave-in. 3 more people disappeared, including Eleanor Blackwood. They found her coat near the mausoleum. Her wedding ring, placed on the front steps of the church the next morning, covered in moss dot that same day. Rebecca woke with her hands covered in scratches symbols she didn't remember carving, but which matched the glyphs on the trees. "It's punishing me," she said. "Then give it what it wants." "I am," she said. "I'm just refusing to give it what it doesn't need. What if it takes that anyway?" She didn't answer. I returned to Blackwood Hollow on the 6th night of fog. The moment I entered town, my phone lost service. Birds flew in circles above the manor. Every window was closed. The town felt like a wound trying to scab dot at the edge of the forest. Rebecca was waiting. "I'm glad you came," she said. "What's happening?" "It's unraveling. The barrier between the town and the forest, between the thing and everything else, it's thinning." She gestured behind her. "I need you to come with me." We walked through the woods in silence, following a path that seemed to twist and move as we stepped. Eventually, we arrived at a clearing I hadn't seen before. The trees here were ... wrong, twisted inward. Some burned at the roots. Others bled resin that glowed faintly in the dim light. In the center stood a new formation of stones taller, now and darker. Rebecca stepped into the center. "This is where the next sacrifice is meant to happen," she said. "It's made a place for it. It's inviting me. To give yourself?" She nodded. "Or someone else." I felt sick. "I thought it was accepting your terms," I said. "It was," she whispered, "until it realized I wasn't afraid." She turned to face the trees. "Are you listening?" she shouted. "I know you can hear me. I know you want more, but this is not your dominion. Not anymore." The wind roared suddenly through the trees, swirling leaves in a violent spiral. The ground shook. And then, as quickly as it began, everything stilled, and a voice not spoken, but felt passed through the clearing dot and show me another way. Rebecca turned to me. "You heard it too?" I nodded slowly. "It's never spoken to anyone like that." Before, she said, not even Josephine. She stepped forward, placed her hands on the tallest stone, and whispered something too soft for me to catch. Then she turned to me, her face paler than I'd ever seen it. It wants a memory. She said, what kind of memory? One it doesn't have. One it's never felt. She reached into her coat and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a locket-worn, simple, etched with initials. My mother gave me this when I turned 10, she said. Inside is a picture of her holding me. It's the last memory I have before she died. The last time I felt loved without weight. She walked to the center of the stones and placed the box at the base of the altar. Then she stepped back. The wind didn't howl. The earth didn't shake Dot, but the trees, every one of them exhaled Dot a warm breeze swept through the clearing, and somewhere in the distance, a child's laughter echoed once. Rebecca fell to her knees, and the fog began to lift. By morning, the fog had receded. The sunlight returned slowly, filtering through the trees like a nervous guest returning to a room it once owned. Birds chirped again. Not many, but enough to remind the town that something had ended and something else had begun. No one in Blackwood Hollow said it aloud, but they all knew. The stillness had shifted. The air was lighter. The crows were gone, and the disappearances stopped. The people who had vanished never returned, not even Eleanor Blackwood. But their names were no longer spoken in fear. A memorial was erected at the edge of the cemetery, just inside the wrought iron fence. 6 names carved into black stone. Rebecca Lenley Harris was the one who unveiled it. She stood before the townspeople, no podium, no microphone, just her presence, and read each name aloud. Her voice was steady, clear. I can't bring them back, she said, but I can honor them by changing what brought them to this end. She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. Everyone in Blackwood Hollow knew that the forest had been fed for too long. Now it was being taught how to fast. I stayed in town a few more weeks, not as a journalist. Not really. I stopped taking notes. I didn't ask questions. I simply watched Rebecca move through the town like a tether, reconnecting old lines of trust that had frayed over decades. She met with business owners, helped restore the chapel. Ruth organized cleanup crews to rebuild the collapsed mine. She didn't advertise her role as matriarch. She didn't need to. The town began calling her Miss Lenley in quiet tones, half respect, half superstition. But she answered to Rebecca, and she answered everyone. She returned to the forest often, always alone. I asked her once what she did out there. I listen, she said, and I teach. To what? To it, to myself, to what I'm becoming. One night, near the end of my stay, she invited me to the manor again. We sat by the fireplace in the parlor where Evangeline used to hold court in silence. The room looked warmer now. Curtains opened, dust cleared. Portraits straightened. I've made a decision, Rebecca said. I turned toward her. About what? The covenant. She reached for a journal, her own this time, not Josephine's or Evangeline's. The pages were filled with looping script and symbols I didn't recognize. I've been learning its language, she said. Not just the symbols, but the rhythm, the way it thinks. That's a terrifying sentence, she smiled. It should be. But it's also a gift. I can feel the boundaries now, where it ends and where I begin, and I've found a new offering. She leaned closer. Memory. I frowned. Didn't you already give it memory? That was the beginning. A test. But I've realized something. The forest doesn't hunger for blood, not in the way we assumed. It feeds on intensity, on essence, and memories are distilled emotion, purified moments, especially painful ones. Are you saying you're going to give it all your worst memories? She shook her head. I'm going to teach others how to do it, voluntarily, once a year. On the autumn equinox, those willing can enter the circle and give a memory, a true one they're ready to release. You're institutionalizing the offering, I said, turning it into a ritual. No, she said gently. I'm transforming it into a choice. It's no longer sacrifice. It's exchange. And what do they get in return? She looked toward the window, where the trees barely moved in the moonlight. Peace, clarity, healing, and in turn, the forest gets fed. And if they don't volunteer, the town still thrives. Because I'll carry the covenant, it only needs one to sustain it. But many can strengthen it. I exhaled slowly. You're changing a tradition that's lasted nearly 2 centuries. I have to, she said. Because if I don't, eventually, someone will go missing again. The forest doesn't forget. But maybe, just maybe, it can learn. She handed me a folded paper. Inside was a symbol the same eye I'd seen etched into trees, but with a new addition, a tear running from its center. It's the new mark, she said. I left it in the clearing. It accepted it. Does that mean it agreed? No, but it didn't reject it. In Blackwood Hollow, that's what passed for a miracle. The equinox came, and the townspeople gathered. Not all of them. Some stayed away. Old wounds take time to trust new healing. But a surprising number arrived, standing just outside the forest with candles in hand. One by one, they stepped into the stone circle and left behind something small. A letter, a photograph, a recording. One woman read a poem aloud and burned it in the center. A boy whispered his father's name and left behind a worn baseball cap. Each time, the forest listened and said nothing. But that night, when the last candle flickered out, every tree in Blackwood Hollow bloomed a single white flower. In September. No one could explain it. No one tried. When I left the town again, for what might be the final time, I stopped at the manor to say goodbye. Rebecca met me on the porch. The trees behind her were golden now, touched by a season they no longer feared. I'm going to write the full truth one day, I told her. All of it. Maybe you should, she said. But maybe some stories aren't for the world. Maybe they're just for those who need to carry them. Will you ever leave this place? I asked. She looked toward the forest. I'm already part of it, she said. But I'm also still me. That's the balance now. We shook hands. The same way Evangeline and I had once done. Only this time, the pact felt lighter. You gave it your memories, I said as I turned to leave. What did you keep? She smiled softly. My hope. As I drove away, the town faded in. The rear-view mirror. The trees bowed gently in the wind. The manor stood on its hill, no longer looming, but watching with quiet reverence. And somewhere deep in the woods, something ancient waited, not with hunger, but with patience, because even gods must learn, especially from those brave enough to teach them. It's been 6 months since I left Blackwood Hollow. The world outside doesn't know the name. Or if they do, it's just a dot on a map, one of those towns people drive past on their way to somewhere bigger, louder, less haunted. I returned to city life. The newsroom. Coffee in paper cups. Deadlines. Podcasts. Elevator doors that never quite close fast enough. My apartment overlooks a concrete courtyard filled with strangers. Life has a hum here, a pulse. But sometimes I can still hear the forest. Breathing. I haven't written the article. Not the real one. Not yet. I filed a piece clean, factual, distant. A town reclaims its roots. The strange revival of Blackwood Hollow. It ran in a lifestyle section, squeezed between an expose on pumpkin farming and a profile of a retired opera singer. Readers called it poetic, unusual, mysterious, but they didn't know the truth. not the one that grows under bark and stirs in. Soil, not the one I carry in silence. I sometimes wonder if Rebecca ever reads what I write now, or if she's too far gone into the green to care about newspapers anymore. Maybe she's found something better than words language that grows in rings and moss and dream. But then again, maybe that's the point. Some truths aren't meant for print. They're meant for passing down, whispered by firelight, etched into stone, remembered by those brave enough to listen. I kept one thing from the manor. Rebecca left it for me in a sealed envelope, delivered by a quiet man with no return address. Inside was a single page from her journal. No date, just a passage. To carry the covenant is not to serve a god, but to remind it of its limits. We are not livestock. We are storytellers. And even gods must obey the shape of stories, or be forgotten by them. I read that sentence every time I begin to write something new. It reminds me that narrative has weight, that it can contain power, that what we write can become ritual. Sometimes I wake in the night and hear the wind whispering against my windows. Not words, just rhythm, like breath, like old branches swaying in time with a dream. I don't live near a forest, but it doesn't seem to matter. A few weeks ago, I received a letter. No return address. No postmark. Inside was a photograph, grainy, black and white. It showed the stone circle, the altar, and Rebecca standing alone in the center, surrounded by people, townsfolk, children, even a few elders I recognized from the funeral. They were all holding something in their hands, books, letters, trinkets. Offerings. On the back of the photo was a message. They've begun to share their stories. It is listening, and for now, it is full. I placed the photo on my desk, not to remind me of what happened, but to remind me of what must continue, because there's something sacred in choosing to remember, and something powerful in choosing to tell. If you ever find yourself in a small town surrounded by trees that lean just a little too far inward, if the wind carries whispers that don't belong to it, if the shadows move like they're listening, then listen back, not with fear, but with reverence, because not every forest hungers for blood, some hunger for truth. And if you're lucky or cursed, you might just be chosen to feed it. Not with your life, but with your story.